If we're waiting to engage our team members with a survey, we've failed.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Break the Wheel. Today, I am here with Thad Price, the CEO at Talroo and Ready, Set, Hire. Thad Price, so pretty cool, interesting reading about your background and the companies that you've started. So Ready, Set, Hire and Talroo, they're hiring platforms for businesses located nationwide that are seeking essential and frontline workers. And Thad has 20 years plus of experience in the recruiting and talent acquisition space, including his previous positions as VP of Job.com and more. He's a nationally recognized thought leader in HR and the recruitment space. Welcome, Thad.
David, great to be here. Thank you so much for the invite.
Awesome. Yeah. And you're one of the folks who I like to surprise with this format because I know you haven't seen an episode yet, which is great. So we're going to dive right in with one of my favorites, Uncork and Unwind. So this week, our wine is from New York. And speaking of New York City's app-based delivery workers saw total weekly earnings increased to $28.3 million in Q1 2024, a 22% increase over Q4 of last year when the city began enforcing its new $17.96 app-based delivery wage. What are your thoughts on mandating bumps in base pay for gig workers?
My first thought is it has to come from somewhere. And what I read on Bloomberg is that basically a 58% increase in delivery fees with increases in wages. So I think the first we have to prepare for sticker shock when we're thinking about the idea of increasing wages. Of course, people need to be paid for their value, but just know that we have to be prepared to pay more so that that can trickle down into labor and into pay.
It's an interesting topic. I remember, the early days of Uber and Lyft, et cetera. Everything was really, really cheap. And then in the last, several years, this focus has been more on profits. Like, it's been getting almost as expensive, if not more expensive sometimes, as taxis. And then you also hear gig workers getting sometimes undercut. It's like, where are things going?
Absolutely. That's the typical what you see in corporate environments that come in and they're the low cost provider that provides a lot of value in a market. And then as they gain dominance, of course, prices always increase. It's the nature of the beast, and it's how the world works. Fortunately for some, unfortunately for others.
Exactly. At least the capitalist world, indeed, 100%.
That's right.
All right. Well, HR Newsflash. So the Conference Board recently outlined its findings on the expensive nature of bias. The firm noted that it can cause high attrition rates, with expenses adding up to 150% of an employee's annual salary. Bias can also decrease employee engagement and reduce productivity. I know it's been a very big topic lately, as we've seen some of the changes with how SHRM, for example, has been talking about DE and I, or I and D, or whichever letters are used. What are your thoughts on bias here and how it could be avoided?
Well, there's been a lot of talk, of course, as there's been a lot of coverage in AI and how companies are using AI to fuse as part of their hiring process and part of their screening processes. And I think at the end of the day, we have to get back to the basics, which is, we have to really understand what our humans are doing and how that process may impact bias in our core systems over time based on behavior that may be happening. So you're absolutely right. I think we have to look and we have to think about our entire process holistically and understand where there may be bias introduced in every step of the process. And if we do that, we can be more successful at ensuring that there's limited bias in different workflows and processes, especially in hiring and recruiting. But I think, when you read a lot about it today, a lot of it is focused on how the machines are being biased in their process. And you're right, they can be if they're trained on human behavior that is biased. So a lot of ways to combat that, and a lot of ways to think about that through your entire hiring cycle and hire process. And just remember, right, it's a process. It's a hiring process. There's a hiring manager involved, there's recruiting involved, there's talent acquisition involved. All of these processes occur. And so really you have to think about it from a holistic standpoint at the top of the hiring process, and where you start saying, I need to hire someone, and what can you do at the beginning of that process to ensure that you are fair and balanced in how you think about hiring, and through that process track through the entire funnel to hire.
I'm reminded of a lot of the research that they show about when looking at resumes, the likelihood of someone moving someone to the next step based off of the name in the resume and who they imagine when they read that name. On the one hand, it's awful that that's still a thing, and it will, always be a thing because unconscious bias is a thing. But on the other hand, I imagine that if the algorithms are carefully crafted to actually counteract something like this, whether it be AI or otherwise, that maybe they can actually help.
Yeah, absolutely. Can definitely help correct and course correct. And I think that's what it's all about. But it all starts with a conversation, understanding where we may be falling in that regard, and how we can improve and how we can ensure that we're fair in how we approach the hiring process.
Absolutely. Well, I'd love to dive into your world, do a little bit of a reality check to get some perspective. We haven't yet had anybody on the show that has been knowledgeable and experienced in the world of gig work and kind of just this very different side of the business of hiring, of recruiting, of HR. A lot of folks that we talk to, a lot of folks that are listening are kind of focused on knowledge workers. They're focused on a lot of, I don't know. Is white collar and blue collar, are these still the words that are used to describe things? I don't know. But
they are used, but we like to say essential worker and knowledge worker.
Excellent.
To really put an emphasis on the value that they bring to the economy.
Absolutely. So hearing about essential workers and what it's like to hire them, the process to go through, how you manage and navigate talent, I imagine that there are a lot of differences when looking at essential workers versus knowledge workers. Thank you for that. So we'd love to hear, from your world, what's going on in your world, and give us a little slice of life in your space.
Well, it's been interesting over the last few years, especially coming off the pandemic, and hiring as fast as you can and ensuring that you're able to fill the recs needed to be able to grow businesses. And I think the biggest thing that's happened is this idea of folks are even more so, something we've been chatting about for years. They're looking for companies where they can go and where they can grow, right? And they're looking where they can provide value at the individual company level, but where they can grow their career and where they can take their career in the next step. And I think that's very important. When you think about app-based work and gig work, it's very transactional. It's a very transactional nature of income where, you're turning on your app, you're actually delivering something, and you're getting a reward for it, right? You're getting some income for actually delivering a product or providing a service to someone. And that's very transactional. In the case of frontline and essential worker hiring, when you're thinking about this idea of making that decision to hire someone, people need to know that there's a larger opportunity ahead, right? It's about selling the opportunity, selling where you can grow with a company, and how others have done that, right? And that's very important, because many people, when they think about hiring frontline and they think about essential worker hiring, they're trying to transactionally fill a role today. I need help doing this. But the individual worker and the one that's providing value to your business to be able to fill that void, they're looking for something more, right? They're looking for something they're not having. And not only that, in order to attract a candidate that may already have a job, the job needs to be better than what they're doing today. And you have to sell them that job is better and that your culture is better than what you have today. And so if you think of this idea of marketing and how we think about consumer marketing, candidate marketing and talent acquisition truly is more like a marketing function. And you think of the all-powerful job ad. We spend all this time building a job ad, a job posting. It's marketing copy. It's getting attention, getting someone's attention to get them to apply to your opportunity, and then essentially walk through the process. They need to be engaged. They need to go through the interview process, connect, of course, with the hiring manager, and then you make that decision to come be a part of a team. And that is a process, and people want more than just a transactional nature to be able to generate income.
Totally makes sense. I really like your characterization of thinking about it as marketing, in that, at least when I think about a lot of the recs and just TA in general in I don't know, knowledge worker land, in which I'm familiar and have spent most of my career in, I find that there's always this really high emphasis on accuracy, on making sure that you're capturing all of the skills that are required for the job, or making sure that you're, capturing all the requirements, the prerequisites, if you're sharing comp information, that those things are appropriate comp ranges that are in line. And I find that like that tends to be the focus instead of, and sometimes also hopefully, addressing bias in the language that you use so that it doesn't alienate certain audiences or cause certain folks to, for example, too many requirements listed, and then, women may be less likely to apply, for example. But it's interesting to think about it as marketing. And I'm curious, like in terms of, the tools and the stuff that you work with day in and day out at your company, like, is that kind of that marketing lens, the lens that you use to determine what tools you provide?
It is. I mean, when you think about data and how you should use data to be able to inform marketing decisions, we process about 120 million jobs a month. Now we're processing those jobs, we're deduping those jobs, we're enriching those jobs, we're looking for signals, metadata that may be happening. We're extracting information from those jobs to even normalize those jobs, to understand what the market looks like. Once we understand what the market looks like, we dedupe those jobs, find the unique jobs, understand the benefits of individual jobs, the requirements of jobs, the skills of jobs. Then what we can do is we can help really understand what the market looks like, what the demand looks like for jobs, right? Across different locations, across different job families, whatever it may be. And then our job is to then find the supply to satisfy the demand of someone looking to hire in certain areas based on certain experience, skills, and certain recs that are looking to think about. When you think about marketing, this idea of marketing, years ago in online marketing, many of the largest advertising agencies got together and they basically said, hey, we need to move this conversation to more data-driven experiences to focus on audiences, right? So if you think about it today, a large brand, they don't wake up and say, I want to buy an ad on Yahoo. Yahoo still has a lot of people. A lot of people still use Yahoo for many different things. But people don't wake up and say, can I buy a marketing campaign on Yahoo? What they do is they say, I want to reach people that are in market. If you're a auto manufacturer, in market to buy a car. How can I reach audiences that are in market to buy a car? And so then they go to their advertising agency or they go to another platform and they say, all right, just find me audiences of people that may be in market to buy a car. And then the automakers of course, advertise to those companies. Well, in our industry, how we think about it is that should happen with talent audiences, right? When you think about advertising a rec and you think of having this very structured, well, actually, they lack a lot of structure. Job posting. Yeah. If you can extract and normalize interesting things about a job posting, then actually normalize behavior and skills of a job seeker, you can unlock and try to find talent audiences that may match wherever that talent audience lives. It doesn't necessarily need to live on LinkedIn, Indeed, other job sites. Your idea is to unlock that talent audience, and that's what really sets Talroo apart from our competitive set. Is we believe in this idea of talent audiences and talent, and our job as a platform is to try to unlock that talent audience wherever it may be using our platform and using our system. And that's really interesting in thinking about marketing and how marketing works today. Again, focusing on this idea of talent audiences and making that more making that powerful instead of this destination approach where I'm going to post my job somewhere, and we've all heard it, post and pray you get the right candidate, and kind of go from there. Quality audiences, all this is important, and what gets us up, gets us going and gets us up in the morning to continue to invest and innovate here at Talroo and at Ready Set Hire.
I love that. Well, talent audiences, I think it's a fascinating concept because you're thinking a lot about, again, where your talent is. And in the context of equity, I actually get interested in this because when maybe even the demographics of the talent audiences, and the equity side of things, like the demographics that you're looking to, to emphasize in where you're searching, that there's a lot that you can control to be able to, for example, like have, an equitable representation so that, you're more likely to have, that diverse candidate pool that can enrich your hiring experience and the folks that you bring on board, which I think is fascinating. I confirm it. We have like a very similar angle when we think about, capturing internal candidates for potential role transfer. Like we have tools to be able to assess what skills and behaviors people excel in, not based off of how they self-identify, but how others at the company identify them, right? Like through organizational network analysis, who do you go to for help and advice, and about what skills or what behaviors, are causing you to go to them for help and advice, and then using that data to index so that you can find the right internal hires. And I hadn't really been thinking as much about this idea of candidate pools and marketing internally, but it kind of reframes some of how we might think about reaching internal folks for particular roles, which is cool.
Makes a lot of sense. And then from our standpoint, when we think about a small business, that's where Ready Set Hire really, that's why we built Ready Set Hires, because we found that a lot of small businesses don't necessarily have a good recruiting process. And so if we think about this talent audience thought, the thesis around a talent audience, how do we find talent audiences, and how do we then match talent audiences to the right employer? Many employers don't necessarily have a process that uses best practices, and many small businesses, they really don't have the luxury of having a talent acquisition team or a talent acquisition function. And so all of this data that we see from the market, can we help arm small businesses with this data in an intuitive platform to help give salary suggestions on what you need to pay to be successful when you're looking to hire, to how to write a job posting, to you should think about these qualifying questions. And when you actually create the rec, you should think about syncing your calendar so that when you go through our apply process on Ready Set Hire, and we use a chatbot like experience, and we ask those qualifying questions. If a candidate is a great fit, could you sync your calendar, immediately get interviews magically appearing on your calendar? The whole idea is to essentially think of Ready Set Hire as like your personal recruiting assistant, automating all of this workflow that otherwise someone would be doing, and that someone as a small business owner would be the business owner, and make it easy for them. And so if you think about having this access to talent audiences, then how can we use that for companies that don't necessarily have an applicant tracking experience, or an applicant tracking experience that is friendly? How can we then use that to be more effective at the process? To ensure good flow, like it's a marketing funnel, right? To ensure a good amount of candidates, great leads coming in. And at the end of the day, we want to ensure that there's an offer and there's a hire that's made.
That makes sense. Well, and I imagine that some of the folks listening may be folks that are part of a small business, maybe are an HR person of one, or just a CEO of a small business that has no HR function, like you mentioned. Gotcha. In the spirit of people misunderstand, our next segment, I'm kind of curious to hear, what do you think that some of this group might misunderstand that you might be able to share with them that could be enlightening and helpful?
I think the biggest idea is, just as I shared some information about marketing and talent acquisition is marketing, recruitment marketing is very important to the overall process of being successful at recruiting. I think the other thing to share is your candidates are your consumers. And it's a pretty powerful statement, because when you think about your candidates as your consumers, it allows you to think about a level of service that we should provide, that we require to provide our consumers. And it allows us to soul search a little, to ask the question internally, are we giving that same level of service to our candidates as we are giving our consumers? And that's pretty profound when you think about that from a business perspective.
Yeah, I just think about ghosting. I mean, if you ghosted your consumers, ghosting happens all the time. And I hate that. I hate it. And OMG, yeah, the thought of ghosting your consumers for anything would just be unheard of.
Yeah, imagine, right? You walk into your favorite retail establishment, you go, "Hi, how are you today?" And then no one responds. And so
right.
Suddenly you probably don't. That's what happens when you apply for a job in many businesses that don't make it a priority, right? You submit your information, you're like, "I really want to work here." And then all of a sudden no one responds, and that still happens. And we have this kind of black hole, phenomenon that we've been talking about for years in recruiting and hiring. As I apply to a job and I never hear back. But I think when you make that a priority, there are some small adjustments that you can make in your process to be mindful of. The service I'm providing my candidates is that level of service that I'm providing my consumers. It's a different way to think about things.
Absolutely. I mean, for anybody that has been to a Louis Vuitton during a high season in a very popular place, I can say that I've definitely gone to the front of the line and heard something that basically is similar to a thank you for your interest in Louis Vuitton. Unfortunately, there are no open slots right now, but we'll keep you in mind for the future. You're always welcome to come back again, you know? So maybe that's the closest version of a hiring rejection that you might find in consumer land.
That's right. That's right.
I love that. Awesome. Well, moving on to one of my favorite segments, Break the Wheel or Break a Heel. This time we're going to shift perspective and actually talk about yourself as a CEO managing this business. You have employees, you have a team that you're trying to grow, that you're trying to do things with. So from that lens, talking about HR systems and standards from the perspective of a CEO. Kind of curious to hear, about each of these. So you tell me, break the wheel, you think it's good, it's necessary, or break a heel, you don't need it. All right. Number 1, engagement surveys. Break the wheel or break a heel?
I would say break the wheel.
Any color? Tell us why.
Well, when we think about engagement and we think about that is we as a, for a couple of reasons. Sorry, we probably need to redo this.
That's okay. Go for it. We'll start from, all right. So starting first with break the wheel or break the heel, engagement surveys, break the wheel or break a heel?
I would say break a heel on engagement surveys.
Interesting.
And so I'd probably and there's a reason for this. And the reason why I would say break a heel, that is because if we're waiting to engage our team members with a survey, we've failed. And what I mean by that is I think too often businesses can hide behind an engagement survey without being engaged with their team. And so from that perspective, we should make it a point to be very engaged with our team and understand at the individual level, the level of engagement of your team members. So yes, I think there's value, but let's not hide behind it as a crutch, as something that, our engagement survey says that things are wonderful. You should be having more one-on-one connection with your team members to ensure, that they're happy and they're willing to continue to provide value and excited to continue to help you accomplish your vision.
I get the spirit of what you're sharing, which is, certainly something that we've seen both with performance management and with engagement surveys and beyond over the last 5 to 10 years, which is a shift from waiting for a long time, doing this one big event, and then missing all the day-to-day opportunities to have continuous conversations about what people are feeling good about or not good about, and kind of more regular pulse checks, it sounds like.
That's right. So from that perspective, I would say break the heel.
Okay, great. Then next, break the wheel or break a heel. You can answer freely, right? Even though we ignore what our company does. This one is performance reviews. Break the wheel or break a heel?
I think they're very important. So I would say break the wheel.
Okay, that's fair.
And I think they're important for us. I think that where a lot of companies are, aren't leveraging performance reviews like they should, is because it becomes more of a chore. Mm-hmm. And I think that if we look at it in its simplest form of, can I provide feedback in a more of a performance review format that's simple and we don't overthink it, then they could be very successful in how we think about learning from that and how we can help folks continue to grow and learn and see where they need to course correct.
Makes sense. And what you're sharing about, some folks conflate, performance assessment with performance development. And I think what you're sharing is on the performance development side, being able to make sure that people get feedback and they know what they need to know to be able to improve, that's critical, that's useful, that's helpful.
Yeah,
totally agree.
Absolutely.
The performance assessment side, when people are getting a score, for example, and the bias in those scores, and where sometimes those scores, if you just have a manager's opinion and maybe aren't informed by what the network of folks around somebody might see, that sometimes there can be some risk in performance assessment if all you have are those manager opinions. That's at least my stance.
Totally agree.
Cool. All right, next. Gifting as a part of rewards. So I guess as part of your total rewards, gifting. within your company? Break the wheel or break a heel?
I would say break a heel.
Okay.
And the reason why I would say that is because it should never be expected. It should always be a surprise.
That's
and
fair.
I feel if you set a focus on this idea of gifting being an expectation, then you lose the ability to surprise and provide a level of excitement that would otherwise, you would otherwise lose in that situation. So I think of it as like a surprise and something that when it's unexpected, and that's the value of gifting, and that's the value of, when you least expect it, providing it, but not something that is expected in a current format for a company.
I feel like if you replace the word gifting with tipping and tipping culture, there's a whole set of conversations that are very relevant.
You're absolutely right.
This actually ties into my later "What should I have done" story, so I'll save it for that. Very interesting. All right, number 4, annual all hands meetings. Break the wheel or break a heel?
This one's tough because I think, like number 1, it should never be annual. Right? We have to be constantly setting expectations of where the business is, at least quarterly. And so, if I were to say, if you had a choice, I would say break the heel on annual, break the wheel on quarterly. So that would be how I would think about it. But I think at that time, it's probably too late. So, much like the first one as well.
Fair enough. I still know, I'm thinking of a fintech organization with over 1,000 employees that we've worked with, and they actually have daily, essentially all hands just to start their day at the same time. Wow. And, it's just like, 5 to 10 minutes and occasional sharing. But we've actually embraced that at Confirm. We actually do daily as well, just again, to kind of get aligned once a day. People share topics. It's just kind of but, depending on your company size, may not always be feasible. But, I guess your mileage may vary.
Yeah, great point.
Awesome.
Totally agree.
All right, next, we got our wheel breaker of the week. This time, it's OSHA. So OSHA proposed a rule on July 2nd to protect employees from extreme heat, marking the first major federal regulation to prevent heat-related workplace deaths. This comes amid some states rolling back worker safety measures. Between 2011 and 2022, an average of 40 workers died annually from heat exposure, though these figures are likely underestimated. Rising temperatures have increased calls for a federal heat standard. The proposal requires employers with more than 10 employees to create a written heat injury and illness prevention plan. So I'm curious, wheel breaker of the week, what's your reaction to that? Hopefully you feel good about the protections, but there's also, federal regulations is definitely a hot topic today, and like what should or shouldn't be regulated and what should OSHA control, hot topic.
I totally get it.
No pun intended.
No, I totally get it. I mean, this is just, absolutely. I think that this is a good thing, right? And how we think about tracking this and ensuring that there's value. Absolutely. So, and we can scratch whatever you want to here. I'm trying to think cool. I don't even know how to respond to it because it just seems
obvious.
It seems that there's a problem that we have to fix, and that's why we have regulation in the world to fix these types of issues that we need to report on, so that we can be good humans and good people and be a society that actually provides for their constituents. Anyway.
Yeah, that resonates. I mean, that's why sometimes there's value in having regulations and federal agencies that are looking out for little details like this that may not always be covered in laws, as an example. Yeah. So interesting.
Yes.
Awesome.
Totally interesting.
All right. Jumping and moving along, one of my favorite segments, What Should I Have Done? So this is where I share with you something that happened in my real life, and I don't tell you what I did, but I ask you what you think I should have done, and you tell me what I should have done, and then I'll tell you what I did. Ready?
Okay, great.
All right.
Let's try.
So, given that your companies are focused on gig work, I figured that a gig work story would be very relevant. So this happened in the not too distant past. As many folks sometimes do, I definitely use delivery apps online when it makes sense with a group of people. I am a terrible cook and don't want anyone to suffer by my cooking, so we order from a delivery app. We got some ramen and saw that there was like some issues in terms of the timing for the delivery driver to get to us. And when the food came, it was pretty cold. But my friend, who actually, when I did the order with my friend, it was on my friend's phone, and my friend was so upset about the food coming cold that they wanted to remove the tip. And I could have said something or not said something in that moment, and that was my choice. So if you were me in that moment, what should I have done?
Communication in life will set you free. And so I think, you should have communicated your thoughts and your feelings of, how you think that was potentially, I'm not sure where you sit on the fence. I sort of have an idea, but how you should react in those situations. And, from my perspective, I would have probably said, hey, you're removing a tip. Maybe it's not this person's fault. It could have been the app's issue of overbooking. What about the restaurant? But here we are impacting the livelihood of this individual that's just doing the best they can with the hand they've been dealt.
Absolutely. Well, definitely aligned with you there. So I did say something. I said almost actually exactly what you shared, but probably in a much less kind way. I think I was probably a little rude when I said it, because I was like, I don't know, just there's an entitlement sometimes that I think folks can get when they're using some of these services, and because there's this distance, right? When somebody is bringing you something via delivery, you may not know anything other than their name when you see them in the app, and then they deliver, they're gone, and oftentimes, just in the same way as a waiter, may have nothing to do with why the food came out bad. Like, it's kind of interesting where sometimes folks place blame.
That's a good point. I've never thought about that, because from that perspective, I'm thinking about when I've ordered and I've had issues like that. What's happened is I've thought, oh, it's the restaurant's fault. It's the restaurant. I've never thought, oh, it's the delivery driver. It's the delivery driver's fault and how they think about things. And so, but if we were in the restaurant, we would be placing blame on the individual or the waiter, as you mentioned. But in this situation, we're not, or at least I don't. I place it on the restaurant. So it's funny how we think about that, and how it is a different dynamic than when we normally think, versus dining in.
Totally,
it's a really great point.
And when you get that, like, please rate this from 1 to 5 stars. Like, do we always like, if we had a negative experience because of the food versus because of the delivery or how late something was, it's like, what is our rating and what does it really reflect? And is it really, if it's about the restaurant, are we really giving a good rating there? Or, sometimes you go and you read these comments and it's like, oh yeah, this it's about the restaurant, and you see like, oh, delivery took too long, 2 stars. And it's like, probably had nothing to do with the restaurant.
It's very true. It not delivery related to restaurants, but every so often I will hail a taxi when I'm traveling in a city, just because I think it helps keep balance in the world around, and keeps me in check of, hey, taxi experience versus, a ride sharing experience, Uber or Lyft, or one of the local providers as well. And it's insane. Every time I'm like, why did I do this? Why did I take a taxi? I mean, it's a horrible experience, right? Compared to, the alternative that we have today, thankfully. And so I think that, transparency in all things, you mentioned reviews, and all things experience, whether it's culture, company, job experience, any of these things, delivery driver, transparency is, what is important in today's environment. More than ever, and we see it across the entire economy, across every industry, and that, I think, is what we as a society yearn for, right? We yearn for trust and transparency, and so that's, I think, what is the driving force of many of the successful companies and industries that are really thinking about business differently today.
100%. And bringing trust and transparency to places where it wasn't there before. I mean, I can tell you, I'm much more willing to get a ride when I arrive in Las Vegas at the airport when I'm taking, a ride share, than I was back in my 20s, when they'll take you wherever they need to go to get you there with, and charge you extra, right? Fascinating. Well, moving on, we got the Wobbly Wheel of the Week. So this week, a lawsuit alleging that Workday's AI screening software tool is biased can move forward. The plaintiff alleged that since 2017, he's applied to over 100 positions at companies that use Workday screening tools for recruiting. He's been rejected from every position despite having the relevant qualifications. In his complaint, he said he uploaded his educational information, including his graduation date from a historically black college, and often was required to complete assessments and personality tests that likely revealed and screened him out because of his depression and anxiety. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that, from an industry perspective, there's a lot to learn from this experience and really allows us to really think about things differently in our application deployment, how we're thinking about things, the all-powerful user experience, candidate experience. I think that traditionally, we've looked at this as an industry of, it's the company who's actually using this product in a certain way, and that company that's using the product is the company that's responsible for that relationship. This is a little different, right? It's the vendor, it's the technology service that's actually providing that service directly to the company. So we'll see. I think it's interesting that we're processing this as an industry and trying to really think about how we can think about our products and our systems differently and be more aware of what those of the ramifications as it relates to instances like this in the future. So we will see. We will see. It's
technology is going too fast. AI is going too fast. I say this with like a computer science background. I am scared by how fast it's going and how we're struggling to keep up.
Yeah, if you think about the technology, the way that it was funny. I was chatting with a friend of mine the other day, and I said, there was a product that we were looking at because we were curious about the engine behind the scenes, and just in the last 2 years, generative AI has really, the last 6 months, right, has really changed the game in so many ways. And imagine what the next 2 years are going to look like, or the next 3 years, and the next 4 years. I think that's the scary thing. So we've got to slow down a bit, right? We've got to slow down a bit. We got to look at our processes. We got to look at our products and really focus on the consumer. Again, going back to the idea of candidates are our consumers and ensuring that we're providing a great level of service. I think the first question to ask is, how does this happen? What's the level of service that we're providing this applicant that's looking for a new job? And, where did this process break down completely? So it is a whole new world, and we all have a lot to learn. It's not that as we chatted earlier, bias unfortunately exists, and I think you brought up a great point of how do we leverage the tools that we have to actually improve that process, to limit and to essentially hopefully one day eliminate. But we need to ask another question. That's the question we need to ask, right? Mm-hmm. Not how do we make it faster? How do we make it, how do we make it more effective, more efficient? We need to really think about, the ways in which we can use it to be more productive for society.
Absolutely. And, I've never heard anybody use the phrase equitable algorithms, but it's a phrase that I'm trying to use more and more when talking about some of this, because kind of by default, algorithms that are based off of human data, that are using AI, like they're by default biased, right? And unless you build in equitable algorithms, you're just going to be stuck with perpetuating the same biases that exist. So wise words. Yeah. All right. Yes. Moving on. Water cooler whispers. I'm curious if you have any word on the street in your industry, or maybe in the space of TA or the space of gig workers. Anything juicy in the rumor mill that you think might be interesting for our listeners to hear about?
Well, I think that when you look at the overall labor market, where there's been growth is really in healthcare and government positions. And, I think that as we start to really dive into more of the numbers around labor, we still see that the labor market, from the outside, when you look at the BLS, is performant. But there's some cracks in certain industries, and we've been seeing that. And there are a lot of questions that people are asking. Why were there a lot of layoffs? Over the last 18 months, why haven't we seen that in some cases in some of the reporting and how we think about the labor market? And so I think that there's a lot to learn in how we report and the lens in which we see the world. So I would just leave it at that. I don't think there's any more really to dig into. I think there's probably a tale of two labor markets, maybe a tale of three labor markets. One labor market is the knowledge worker labor market, the frontline and essential worker labor market, and then the third labor market is the government reported labor market, which may or may not be, as effective as it should be in reporting, truly what a lot of folks are feeling, at least folks that are unemployed looking for positions.
It's what I'm reading between the lines in that is be aware of your sources when you're reading, what the numbers say, and, different sources may or may not have certain data in front of them and may or may not be using ChatGPT to write the report, by the way. It's fair enough. Wise words.
Yeah, I think it's just a overall, just broad, it's a way to think about it, right? Just digging a little more into the numbers. I think a lot of people are asking, in different industries, they feel pain, if they've been unemployed for a long period of time, but yet the numbers look great. So what's really happening here? And I think it's just the idea of digging into your individual labor market. If you think about it, there's this idea of people architecture, right? And people architecture would be you as an individual, your career, where you have experience, your skills, and that people architecture in some case has its own labor market. And, although you may feel disconnected to the overall macro view of, what's happening, you have to take a step back and look at your labor market, because your labor market may be very different than the macro view. So
fascinating. Cool. All right. Moving on. HR Speak Funny. This is going to be a quick one. Moonlighting. The word moonlighting. When an employee works a second job in addition to their primary employment. I'm guessing that there's probably a lot of moonlighting that happens with frontline and essential workers.
Absolutely, a lot. Many have other jobs, gig-based employment, marketplaces. Absolutely, huge opportunity.
And if your default job is a night shift and then you're having a second job in the day shift, do they call it daylighting?
That's a good question. I don't
know. Or like twilight lighting. I don't know if you're a vampire. I don't know. Anyway. All right. Moving on. Decline to comment. So I'm going to give you 3 questions and you can pick up to 1 to decline and no more. And we're going to start with the first one. Number 1. What about HR brings a CEO the most stress?
Well, I would say that if we think of what HR stands for, human resources, they're our most precious resource as a company. And I would say that from that perspective, stress is the people behind the team itself and the structure of the team, and ensuring that we have the right folks in the right roles that are being effective for the business to help ensure that we're moving our business forward in the way that we want to. So, I would say the people, right? Human resources are most precious.
That's fair. Everything and everyone was stressful.
That's right.
That's fair. All right.
Way to think about it.
Number 2, of everywhere you've worked, which company had the worst HR function and why?
I'll decline to comment that one.
That's fair. That I could believe. All right. Number 3. Should HR view themselves more as an ROI driver or a culture builder?
Through great culture, there is an ROI, right? Culture brings ROI. And so that's really important for us to think about. So I think without having, great culture and a great way to think about and provide for your team, you will lack the ROI in any hire that you make. So from that perspective, culture is really the leading indicator of if you're going to have an ROI from your team or from your team members or anyone that you may think of.
100%. Awesome. Well, with that, we're at our final segment, which is Cheers to Change. So raise up your glass if you'd like. We have a Cheers to Change this time. In the year since the Pump Act took effect, the share of organizations offering an on-site lactation or mother's room has risen to 73%, up 19 percentage points from 2023, according to the SHRM 2024 Employee Benefits Survey. The federal legislation, which requires employers to provide nursing employees with breaks, as well as a private space free from intrusion, prompted an uptick in interest from potential customers for lactation pods. Sasha Meyer, Mamava's co-founder and chief experience officer, told HR Brew. I think it's great that that's happening. We're, equity and the need for equity is not going to go away no matter what changes with legislation, no matter what changes with our organizations, and the folks that care about it, aren't going to stop caring about it. So with that, cheers to change. Thad, it was lovely to chat with you, to learn about gig work world and essential workers, and a whole new space that I think it's really great to get your perspective on. So thanks for participating in Break the Wheel, and have an awesome rest of your week.
Thanks, Dave. It was a lot of fun. Really appreciate the invite.
Awesome. All right. Have a good one.